Let's jump right into this explainer because today we're tackling something that carries a really heavy emotional weight. We're talking about consistency, specifically why the whole idea of consistency can feel literally impossible for so many Filipino learners. If you've ever struggled to keep up a perfect study schedule and then felt that crushing wave of guilt when life inevitably gets in the way, well, this explainer is absolutely for you. We're going to completely dismantle that toxic, frankly inaccurate narrative of laziness that gets thrown around way too often and see what the actual research says about succeeding when your circumstances are, well, less than perfect.
So why is studying consistently so incredibly hard? Before we get into the data, I just want to pause and validate the immense guilt, the frustration, and the sheer burnout you probably feel when you can't keep up that perfect, unbroken study streak. It's so common for students to internalize a disrupted routine as some sort of personal moral failing, right? You miss a day of reading, or you fall behind on an assignment, and suddenly that little voice in your head tells you that you just aren't disciplined enough. But what if the problem isn't your willpower at all? What if this standard of consistency we've all been sold is just totally disconnected from the reality you're actually living in?
Think about the sheer contrast between expectations and reality. On one side, you've got this idealized study culture that we constantly see plastered all over social media. You know the vibe: aesthetic desks, lightning-fast internet, a perfectly quiet room, and a magical, uninterrupted 4-hour block. But then, there's the gritty, grounded reality that Filipino students face every single day. We're talking about having to share a single smartphone with 3 siblings just to access modules. We're talking about stopping midway through a lecture to do chores, dealing with sudden brownouts, desperately searching for a cell signal, and balancing some seriously heavy family obligations. The gap between these two worlds, it's not a lack of effort. It's a massive, glaring difference in environment and resources.
And that gap brilliantly illustrates exactly what researchers from the MacroThink Institute and the Alternative Learning System, or ALS, have been tracking. It turns out a lack of consistency is largely an environmental and socioeconomic issue. It's absolutely not a character flaw. The push for digital education in the Philippines has really exposed some severe infrastructure deficits. When a student doesn't log in daily, it is usually because they're battling poor connectivity, they simply don't have their own device, or, and the data heavily emphasizes this, they have to prioritize earning an income just to afford basic needs like food and shelter. Surviving the week simply has to come first.
To really put a human face to all those numbers, just listen to this experience from a student in an underserved area. They literally have to walk 4 kilometers one way just to get enough of a signal to download a module. 4 kilometers. Just think about the heroic lengths, the physical exhaustion, and the sheer raw willpower it takes just to connect to a single class. When you are burning that much energy just trying to access your learning materials in the first place, holding you to some standard of perfect daily consistency isn't just unfair, it's practically impossible.
And this whole dynamic is strongly reinforced by research specifically focusing on ALS learners. The findings clearly show that for many students, basic financial survival and familial obligations just have to take absolute precedence over academic consistency. The researchers found a really strong correlation between social barriers, like not having a quiet corner to study in at home, and economic barriers, like literally not being able to afford transportation. So we really need to completely drop that lazy label right now. The fact that students are still fighting for their education despite these overwhelming systemic monsters, that is proof of immense drive, not laziness. Which brings us to our first main takeaway: reframing the narrative and really tapping into that unique Filipino brand of resilience. So if the environment is constantly throwing curveballs, how do Filipino students actually survive and keep going? Well, they do it by leaning into some incredible cultural strengths, traits like kapwa, that deep, shared sense of identity and community, and bahala na. And by the way, bahala na isn't just giving up or being fatalistic. It's actually a hopeful, highly adaptable acceptance of circumstances that are totally beyond your control. Interestingly enough, these cultural traits map perfectly onto formal psychology. Specifically, they align with what's called the triarchic model of grit, which is super relevant in collectivist cultures like the Philippines. Traditional grit usually just focuses on 2 things: perseverance of effort and consistency of interests. But this new model introduces a third, absolutely crucial dimension: adaptability to situations. This right here is the secret weapon. It means that when the brownout hits, or when you suddenly have to cover a shift at work, your grit isn't measured by trying to forcefully smash your way through an impossible barrier. It's measured by your ability to adapt your study plan to that new reality and just keep moving forward. Now, what's really interesting is how this adaptable grit actually plays out in real life.
A study looking at pre-service college scholars in Cebu found something amazing. Almost 80%, 79.1% to be exact, of highly gritty scholars view mistakes not as permanent, devastating failures, but as essential learning opportunities. They've developed this incredible growth mindset. When their routine completely breaks down, or if they fail an exam because of intense external pressures, they don't spiral into self-blame. Instead, they analyze the setback, they adapt, and they use it as a stepping stone.
Just listen to the shift in perspective from one of those very scholars in Cebu. They shared that they actually used to be terrified of making mistakes, but now they see them as genuine chances to improve. They realize that every mistake is a lesson, which ultimately makes them way more confident in their learning. Actively reframing a setback like this, whether that's a bad grade, a missed deadline, or even just a whole week where you couldn't study because of family duties, is a scientifically proven way to build your emotional resilience. It allows you to bounce back from a disrupted routine so much faster because you're dropping that heavy emotional baggage of perfectionism. You accept the messy reality, you learn from it, and you get back to work.
Okay, so how do we actually operationalize all of this? That brings us to section 2, equipping for success, or what we're calling the Laban sa Agos strategy.
A really eye-opening Ateneo de Manila study called Bouncing Back actually looked at how top achievers managed to keep learning during times of severe crisis. And what they found is that resilient students do not rely on rigid, unbreakable schedules. Instead, they do 4 key things. First, they assess their daily energy levels and circumstances. If it's a super high-stress day at home, they simply lower the academic expectation for that day. Second, they create totally flexible routines. Third, they prioritize small, sustainable wins. Maybe that means just reading 2 pages instead of trying to force a whole chapter. And fourth, they master the art of quickly resuming after setbacks. Scaling your effort to your wildly fluctuating daily energy and environment is vastly superior and way more sustainable than trying to force these toxic, short-lived bursts of extreme intensity that just lead straight to a burnout crash.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that we need to completely redefine what consistency actually means in an imperfect environment. Listen closely. Consistency is not studying 4 hours every single day without fail. Real gritty consistency is having a miserable 3-day setback where literally everything goes wrong, feeling all that frustration, and then making the simple, powerful decision to just sit back down at the desk on day 4. It's all about the practice of continuous return.
I want to leave you with this final, empowering thought. Progress isn't about never stopping. It is about always deciding to start again. If you have been carrying around the heavy weight of that lazy label, or if you've been beating yourself up for a broken study streak, it is time to let that go. Please, forgive yourself for navigating imperfect, difficult circumstances. Lean into your inherent resilience, scale your efforts to your actual reality, and embrace steady, adaptable progress. So ask yourself, what will you restart today? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.